Welcome back. We were talking about the media before, Stephen, and your experience at them. There was that infamous dirt file that the Courier Mail had a couple of years ago, or a little while ago, not a couple of years ago, but when they tried to make an example of you, saying that you had a picture of yourself hung in your office, failing to mention the fact that this had been a gift from some mental health patients that you'd actually assisted, and they'd made this present to you as thanks. Perfect example, I think, of how the media can skew the story to suit their own devices.
Very, very much so.
Yeah.
And I mean, that portrait, it's sort of multiple portraits, but it was a great gift because these young people who unfortunately were suffering mental illness, we funded them in terms of their art group, and that was their presentation to me, and it's something I'm quite proud of. It's often disarming because the way I've been represented by many of them is quite challenging, I have to say. But it is a reminder to me, and it was a real passion and interest for me during my time as Health Minister to improve services for people with mental health issues. And we have seen that improvement, but still, in my view, we've got a long way to go yet. If we can get that right, then more people who unfortunately do suffer mental health issues can be brought back in from the periphery of society and back into the mainstream, back into employment, give them a greater quality of life, and out of that, hopefully, a reduction in suicide rates, which is far, far too high, far, far too high.
You yourself had a pretty serious health scare a couple of years back. What do you remember about your heart attack when you were 45?
Not much.
Had you been sick? Had you been experiencing pain prior to it? Or?
No.
So you've been pretty healthy up to that point?
Yeah. And it was during my time as the Health Minister. Yeah. I just became conscious that I was becoming increasingly, over a period of a week, short of breath and just a little bit off. And I went to my GP and I told him this and checked my blood pressure and all that and said, no, you're fine. But then sent me for a blood test, and that afternoon said, get to a hospital now, you've had a heart attack. Yeah. Which was a real shock. Yeah. But then literally, then hitting the hospital and being taken virtually straight into the operating theatre and having the angiogram and talking to the doctor while the procedure's going on, it was just incredible.
Scary experience for you, an interesting experience, because I guess people would assume, I'm having a heart attack, it must be scary, but we all deal with these things in different ways. I would find it kind of fascinating watching what was going on around me.
It was just amazing. Yeah. Seeing stents being put into a couple of arteries, but then literally just staying in hospital for 2 or 3 days, and then home, and a bit of rehabilitation, and you're back. And as my specialist said, you're actually in a much more fortunate position than most blokes. You know what condition your heart's in. Yep. It's now in good nick. Yep. So I'm one of the lucky ones who get to tell the story. Yeah. But I also was struck. My father had a heart attack. He had to have open heart surgery. He was in hospital for 6 weeks. He had 6 months rehabilitation after that before he could return to work. I'm in there for a weekend, and after a couple of weeks back at work. And so to see how health had progressed literally over 20, maybe 25-year period from, at such a speed was also, particularly as Health Minister, absolutely fascinating.
Perfect example is how it was for your father as to how it was for you. You've said that you're planning on retiring after the next election. What do you look forward to most?
Well, next year will be 20 years in State Parliament, 13 of them as a Minister. I've been very, very fortunate, very privileged to have that kind of career. Not many politicians get to do that, but 20 years is long enough. The first thing I'm going to do is have a break and sort of get health, body, mind back together, wash politics out of me and start thinking like a rational human being again. My wife Kaz has just bought a cafe at Burner. We have a small 40-acre property there. So I was always going to build a weekender there, but it's now looking like it's going to be a principal place of residence. And, and that slow food movement interests me. Growing, producing locally, serving it locally as part of an overall food experience. Both Kaz and I, my wife Kaz and I, are very interested and passionate about that. She's a fantastic cook. very talented. So that's intellectually, that's going to be what interests me at least for the next 12 months whilst I figure out what I'm going to do next, which is not really all that clear to me yet.
And I believe it might be on the cards to actually maybe spend a bit of time in the old country as well.
One of the things my father said to me was that at some stage you should go back home, as Dad would always call it.
Still always referred to it as
Mum
home?
and Dad still refer to it as home.
Yeah.
I've only ever been back to Scotland associated with work, never back to where I was born in Aberdeen.
Yeah.
But as my dad always said, you should go back and go for a walk, meaning that the countryside there is just fabulous. So I promised myself to do that as well, something I'm very much looking forward to. But of course that depends on when the election is. If it's February, I don't think I'll be going to Scotland at that time of year. But I also hope to take in some good football matches, soccer matches as well.
A big passion of yours?
Always played it, always loved it. Liverpool's my team, of course, and Aberdeen, or Aberdeen nil, as they're often known these days, tragically. Yeah, I'd like to catch up with some good football while I'm over there too.
And we're pretty much out of time. What will you look back on as your greatest legacy in your time in politics, do you think?
Two things. The end of broad-scale tree clearing in Queensland, and two, the significant improvement in patient safety standards in health. They are the two things I'm most proud about, and I think will have such a lasting impact on our environment, but also our standard of healthcare in this state.
Stephen Robertson, I thank you for your time.
Thanks very much.
You've been watching Meet the Ministers. My name is Shaun Bindley, and I look forward to joining you again next week.